They still talk about the trucker who vanished for 7 minutes on Bray Road, the highway where headlights die and something runs beside you in the dark. Welcome to the Long Road Stories. I'm Hank, and tonight we're following the true account of Marcus Wheeler and what chased his 18-wheeler through the woods of Wisconsin in October 2023. If you've ever driven a dark highway alone, tap subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you keep driving after this? Marcus Wheeler had been driving 18-wheelers for 22 years, and in all that time, he thought he'd seen everything the road could throw his way. He had driven through blizzards in Montana, where visibility dropped to zero, navigated tornado warnings in Oklahoma, and once had to outrun a wildfire in California that came so close he could feel the heat through his window. At 42 years old, with graying temples and weathered hands that gripped the steering wheel with the confidence of decades behind the wheel, Marcus considered himself a professional who did not scare easily. He had delivered everything from refrigerated goods to heavy machinery across all 48 continental states, and his spotless safety record was something he took immense pride in. His company, Midwest Freight Solutions, trusted him with their most difficult and time-sensitive deliveries, which is exactly why they called him on that October afternoon. The dispatch came through around 3 in the afternoon on October 19th. Marcus had just finished unloading a shipment of industrial parts in Milwaukee and was planning to head home to his small apartment in Green Bay for a few days off. His phone rang with the distinctive tone he had set for his dispatcher, a woman named Sandra who had been coordinating his routes for the past 8 years. She sounded apologetic but urgent when she explained the situation. A pharmaceutical shipment needed to reach a research facility in La Crosse by 6 the next morning, and their original driver had called in sick at the last minute. The route was straightforward, mostly Interstate 94 heading west, but with one catch. Road construction had closed a significant section of the interstate, and the detour would add 3 hours to the trip unless he was willing to take the back roads through Walworth County. Marcus knew those roads well enough, the winding 2-lane highways that cut through farmland and dense forests, the kind of roads that GPS systems struggled with because they changed names every few miles. Sandra offered him double overtime pay and an extra day off if he took the job. Marcus thought about his bills, thought about the new transmission his personal truck needed, and agreed. He had driven through that area before, though never at night, and certainly never with the sense of unease that crept into Sandra's voice when she mentioned the specific route. She told him the detour would take him down Highway 43, then cut across on County Road W, and eventually connect with Bray Road before rejoining the main highway. When she said Bray Road, there was a pause, a moment of hesitation that Marcus noticed but did not comment on. Sandra was a no-nonsense professional who had coordinated thousands of deliveries, and if she was hesitant about a simple country road, that was unusual. But Marcus shrugged it off, figuring maybe there were deer crossing issues or poor road conditions she was worried about. He picked up the trailer at the pharmaceutical depot in Milwaukee around 5:30 in the evening. The sun was already setting, painting the October sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The loading dock supervisor, an older man with thick glasses and a clipboard, seemed nervous as he watched Marcus complete his pre-trip inspection. The man kept glancing at his watch and asking if Marcus was sure he wanted to drive through the night. When Marcus assured him that night driving was part of the job, the supervisor muttered something about being careful out there and specifically warned him about the stretch near Elkhorn. Marcus found this odd, but attributed it to small-town superstition. Rural Wisconsin had its share of local legends, and he figured the old-timer was just trying to spook the out-of-town driver with tales of ghosts, or whatever the locals believed haunted their back roads. By 6:15, Marcus was on the road with a full tank of diesel, a thermos of strong black coffee, and his CB radio tuned to Channel 19, where truckers shared road conditions and weather updates. The first hour of the drive was uneventful. He made good time on Highway 43, passing through small towns that were already buttoning up for the night. Streetlights flickered on in tiny main streets where a handful of cars were parked outside local diners and gas stations. The autumn air had that crisp quality that Marcus always associated with Wisconsin in October, and the leaves on the trees lining the highway blazed with red, orange, and gold, even in the fading light. His GPS showed the turn onto County Road W coming up in about 15 miles, and he estimated reaching Bray Road around 8:30, well ahead of schedule. As darkness fell completely, the highway narrowed and the forest pressed in closer on both sides. The comfortable glow of town lights disappeared in his mirrors, replaced by an endless tunnel of trees illuminated only by his headlights. Marcus turned up the radio, an old country station out of Madison, and hummed along to songs he had heard 1,000 times before. This was the part of trucking he actually enjoyed: the solitude, the rhythm of the road, the feeling of being a small point of light moving through a vast darkness. Other drivers complained about the loneliness, but Marcus found it meditative. Out here, it was just him, his rig, and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching toward the horizon. The CB radio crackled with occasional chatter from other truckers on nearby routes, discussing weather conditions and complaining about a way station that was backing up traffic on Interstate 90. Marcus keyed the mic and asked if anyone had recent experience with the roads around Elkhorn and Bray Road. There was a long pause, longer than usual for CB etiquette, before a gravelly voice responded. The voice belonged to a driver who identified himself as Iron Horse, and his tone was cautious when he told Marcus to keep his doors locked and his windows up if he had to drive through there after dark. When Marcus asked why, Iron Horse simply said that there were things in those woods that did not take kindly to strangers, and that several drivers had reported strange encounters on that particular stretch of road over the years. Another voice chimed in, a younger driver who laughed nervously and said that Iron Horse was talking about the Beast of Bray Road, some local legend about a wolfman that supposedly terrorized the area back in the 90s. Marcus thanked them for the warning, but dismissed it as trucker tales, the kind of stories drivers told each other to pass the time and add some excitement to otherwise boring routes. Every region had its legends. He had heard about the Mothman in West Virginia, the Jersey Devil in New Jersey, and countless stories about mysterious hitchhikers who disappeared from locked trucks. In all his years on the road, he had never encountered anything that could not be explained by ordinary circumstances, overactive imaginations, or lack of sleep. He was a practical man who believed in diesel engines, maintenance schedules, and the laws of physics. Monsters and cryptids were entertaining stories, nothing more. At 7:53, Marcus made the turn onto County Road W. The road immediately became narrower, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass each other, and the forest crowded in so close that branches occasionally scraped against the top of his trailer. His headlights cut through the darkness, revealing a winding road that dipped and curved through rolling hills covered in dense woodland. There were no streetlights out here, no houses visible from the road, no signs of civilization except for the occasional reflective road sign warning of curves ahead. The white lines on the pavement were faded and barely visible, and more than once Marcus had to slow down to navigate turns that appeared suddenly in his headlights. This was old Wisconsin, the kind of landscape that had not changed much in 100 years, where small family farms were scattered miles apart and the forest reclaimed any land that was not actively maintained. The clock on Marcus's dashboard read 8:27 when he approached the intersection where County Road W met Bray Road. He had been driving for over 2 hours since leaving Milwaukee, and the monotony of the dark country road was starting to make his eyes heavy despite the coffee. He reached for his thermos, taking a long sip of the lukewarm liquid while keeping one hand on the wheel. The GPS showed Bray Road as a thin grey line cutting northeast for approximately 8 miles before connecting back to a state highway that would take him to La Crosse. According to his calculations, he would be through this section in less than 15 minutes, and then it would be smooth sailing on better maintained roads for the rest of the night. He had no reason to think this stretch would be any different from the thousands of other country roads he had driven throughout his career. The turn onto Bray Road was marked by a weathered green sign that his headlights caught just in time for him to slow down and make the corner. The road was even narrower than County Road W, with a crumbling asphalt surface that showed years of neglect and harsh Wisconsin winters. Potholes dotted the pavement, forcing Marcus to slow to 30 miles per hour to avoid damaging his suspension or the delicate pharmaceutical cargo in his trailer. The forest here was different somehow, the trees older and more densely packed, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out even the faint starlight. His headlights seemed to be absorbed by the darkness rather than piercing through it, creating a bubble of visibility that extended maybe 50 feet ahead before being swallowed by an impenetrable wall of black. Marcus noticed the silence first. His radio had been playing country music, a Garth Brooks song he recognized, but now there was only static. He twisted the dial, trying to find another station, but every frequency produced the same harsh white noise. Even the CB radio was dead, emitting only an occasional pop and crackle that made no sense. He tapped the CB handset against the dashboard, thinking maybe a connection had come loose. But the static continued. This was unusual but not unheard of in remote areas where radio signals struggled to penetrate the terrain. Marcus had driven through dead zones before, and he expected the signals to return once he got through the heavy forest and back into more open country. Still, the silence was unsettling in a way he could not quite explain. Without the radio, he became acutely aware of other sounds. The rumble of his diesel engine, the hiss of air brakes when he slowed for curves, and something else he could not quite identify, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from somewhere behind his cab. He checked his mirrors, but saw only darkness, and the faint red glow of his trailer lights reflecting off the trees lining the road. The thumping continued, irregular but persistent, like something was hitting the side of his trailer. Marcus immediately thought of cargo shifting and made a mental note to pull over at the first safe spot to check his load. Unsecured cargo could throw off his balance and make the truck dangerous to handle, especially on these winding back roads. But as he listened more carefully, the sound did not seem to be coming from inside the trailer. It was external, as if something was striking the outside of the aluminum walls. He considered the possibility of branches hitting the trailer as he navigated the narrow road, but the sound was too heavy, too deliberate. Branches would scrape or scratch. This was more like someone pounding with a fist. At 8:39, Marcus's headlights caught something in the road ahead. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. At first, he thought it was a deer, a common hazard on rural Wisconsin roads, but as he got closer and instinctively began to brake, he realized it was too tall to be a deer. The shape stood in the center of the road, motionless, and appeared to be watching his approaching truck. Marcus slowed to a crawl, his hand hovering over the horn. The shape was roughly the size of a large man, maybe 6.5 or 7 feet tall, but the proportions were wrong. The torso was too broad, the arms too long, and the head sat forward on the shoulders in a way that looked more animal than human. As his headlights fully illuminated the figure, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. It was covered in dark fur, matted and shaggy, and it stood on 2 legs in a posture that was almost human, but not quite. The legs were bent backward at the knee like a dog or wolf, and Marcus could see what looked like claws catching the light where the hands should be. But it was the eyes that made his blood run cold. 2 burning red points reflected his headlights with an intensity that no animal eyes should possess. They did not just reflect light, they seemed to glow with their own internal fire. The creature, for Marcus could not think of it as anything else now, turned its head slowly to face him directly, and in that moment, Marcus understood that whatever this thing was, it was intelligent. It was not simply an animal that had wandered onto the road. It was looking at him, studying him, deciding what to do about this intrusion into its territory. Marcus laid on the horn, the loud blast shattering the silence and echoing through the forest. His immediate instinct was to scare the thing off the road so he could pass. It was what he would do for a deer or any other animal, but the creature did not startle or run. Instead, it dropped to all fours in a motion so fluid and quick that Marcus barely registered the movement. Now on 4 legs, it looked even less human, its back arched and its head low between its shoulders. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Marcus and the creature simply faced each other on that lonely stretch of Bray Road, predator and prey, sizing each other up. Then, without warning, the creature sprang forward with a speed that defied its size, covering the distance between them in 3 massive bounds. Marcus reacted on instinct, slamming his foot down on the accelerator. The diesel engine roared, and the truck lurched forward. But 18-wheelers do not accelerate quickly, especially from a near stop. The creature reached his truck before he could build up speed, and Marcus heard a tremendous bang as something heavy struck the driver's side of his cab. His side mirror exploded in a shower of glass and plastic, and through his window he caught a glimpse of fur and those terrible red eyes just inches from his face. A rational part of his mind registered the fact that the creature would have had to jump at least 8 feet in the air to reach his window, an impossible feat for any known animal. But the irrational, terrified part of his brain that controlled his survival instincts took over completely. He kept his foot pressed to the floor, the speedometer needle climbing slowly as the big rig gathered momentum. Another impact rocked the truck, this time from behind, and Marcus realized with horror that the creature was now chasing him. He could see it in his remaining mirror, a dark shape running on all 4s alongside his trailer with a loping gait that should not have been fast enough to keep pace with a vehicle traveling 45 miles per hour. But it was keeping pace, effortlessly matching his speed, and occasionally reaching out with those elongated arms to rake its claws across the aluminum sides of his trailer. The sound was hideous, like nails on a chalkboard amplified 1,000 times, and Marcus could see long gouges appearing in the metal, deep parallel lines that exposed the insulation beneath. No animal had claws that could cut through heavy-duty trailer aluminum like butter. No natural animal could run this fast for this long. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, and he pushed the truck to speeds that were dangerous on this narrow, winding road. But he was more afraid of what was behind him than what might be ahead. The creature stayed with Marcus's truck for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. His speedometer crept up to 55 miles per hour, the maximum he dared on this road, with its blind curves and deteriorating surface. Sweat poured down his face despite the cold October air, and his heart hammered in his chest so hard he thought it might burst. Every few seconds he glanced at his mirror, expecting to see those red eyes right beside his window, but the creature had fallen back slightly, still running, but no longer directly alongside the trailer. Marcus dared to hope that it was tiring, that whatever impossible reserves of energy had allowed it to keep pace were finally depleting. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature veered off the road and disappeared into the tree line. One moment it was there, a dark shadow racing through the edge of his headlight beams, and the next moment it was gone, swallowed by the forest as if it had never existed. Marcus did not slow down. He kept his foot pressed firmly on the accelerator, his eyes darting between the road ahead and his remaining mirror, certain that at any moment the creature would come bounding back out of the woods. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, and he realized he had been holding his breath without knowing it. He forced himself to breathe deeply, trying to calm the adrenaline that flooded his system and made his hands shake on the wheel. What in God's name was that thing? His rational mind tried to catalog what he had seen, searching for an explanation that made sense. A bear, maybe. Wisconsin had black bears, though they were not common in the southern part of the state. But no bear stood 7 feet tall on 2 legs, and no bear had eyes that glowed red like hot coals. A dog, The shape had been vaguely canine, but there was no breed of dog that size, and dogs did not chase trucks at 50 miles per hour while carving through aluminum with their claws. The word that kept pushing its way into his consciousness was the one the truck driver on the CB had used: beast, the beast of Bray Road. Marcus had dismissed it as folklore, as local legend meant to scare tourists and give the area some character. Every rural region had its monster stories, its tales of creatures that haunted the backroads and deep woods. But he had just seen something that did not fit into any normal category of wildlife. Something that had looked at him with intelligence and malice. Something that had chosen to attack his truck rather than flee from it. Marcus's mouth was dry, and he reached for his coffee thermos with a trembling hand, nearly dropping it before managing to take a sip. The lukewarm coffee tasted like ashes in his mouth, but the act of drinking gave him something normal to focus on, something to ground him in reality. At 8:51, Marcus spotted a gravel turnout ahead, a small widening of the road where utility vehicles could park while working on power lines. He desperately wanted to stop and inspect the damage to his truck, to see how bad the scratches on his trailer were, and to verify that the creature had really vanished. But a stronger instinct warned him that stopping on Bray Road would be a fatal mistake. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there in the darkness, possibly watching him, possibly waiting for him to make himself vulnerable. Marcus drove past the turnout without slowing, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The forest seemed to press in even closer here, the branches forming a tunnel overhead that blocked out all starlight. His single remaining side mirror showed nothing but his trailer lights and the empty road behind him, disappearing into darkness. Then the CB radio crackled to life with a burst of static so loud it made Marcus jump. The voice that came through was distorted, breaking up with interference, but he could make out words. Someone was trying to reach him. Marcus grabbed the handset, his hand still shaking, and keyed the mic. He identified himself with his handle, Wheeler, and asked if anyone could hear him. The response came back garbled, but he caught a few phrases. "Get off Bray Road," and "not safe," and something that sounded like, "It hunts there." Marcus asked the other driver to repeat, but the static returned, even louder than before. And then the CB went completely silent again. Not even the background hiss of an open channel remained. The radio was simply dead, as if someone had cut the power. Marcus checked the power indicator light and saw that it was still on, but no amount of adjusting the squelch or changing channels brought back any sound. His headlights caught a reflective road sign ahead, indicating a sharp curve to the right. Marcus downshifted and hit the brakes, slowing to 30 miles per hour as he navigated the turn. As the truck came around the curve, his headlights swept across something standing beside the road about 50 yards ahead. Marcus's blood turned to ice as he recognized the same dark, hunched silhouette, the same impossible height, the same red eyes that now fixed on his approaching truck. The creature was waiting for him. It had not fled at all. It had simply cut through the forest, running faster than his truck could drive on the winding road, and positioned itself ahead to intercept him. This revelation was somehow worse than the initial encounter. It meant the creature was not just reacting on instinct or territorial aggression, it was hunting him deliberately, using intelligence and strategy. Marcus had nowhere to go. The road was too narrow to turn around, and backing up an 18-wheeler on a dark country road with only one side mirror was nearly impossible and incredibly slow. He had no choice but to go forward, to drive directly toward the thing that waited for him. He pressed down on the accelerator, building up as much speed as the approaching curve would allow, and gripped the wheel with grim determination. If the creature wanted to stand in the road, he would run it down. 18-wheelers weighed 40 tons when fully loaded, and nothing could withstand that kind of impact. The creature seemed to sense his intention, because it moved onto the shoulder as he approached, positioning itself parallel to the road rather than blocking it. As Marcus's truck drew level with it, the creature launched itself at the passenger side of the cab with a powerful leap that sent it crashing into the door with tremendous force. The entire truck shuddered from the impact, and Marcus heard the sickening crunch of metal deforming. He looked to his right and saw the passenger window exploding inward in a spray of safety glass. A massive clawed hand punched through the opening, swiping at the empty passenger seat. The claws were easily 4 or 5 inches long, curved and black, and they tore through the vinyl upholstery like tissue paper. Marcus swerved violently to the right, trying to scrape the creature off against the trees lining the road. He heard branches cracking and the scream of metal on wood as his trailer sideswiped several tree trunks. The creature held on, its claws digging into the doorframe, and Marcus caught a glimpse of its face through the broken window. It was a nightmare made flesh, a grotesque fusion of wolf and human features with the elongated snout full of yellowed teeth, flattened ears pressed back against its skull, and those burning red eyes that stared at him with unmistakable hatred. The creature's other arm reached through the window, groping for Marcus, and he pressed himself as far to the left as he could, plastering himself against the driver's side door. The claws came within inches of his chest, close enough that he could feel the displaced air from their movement. Then Marcus did something that was either brilliant or insane. He hit the brakes hard. The sudden deceleration threw the creature forward, and its grip on the doorframe slipped. It tumbled along the side of the truck and fell away, hitting the pavement with a heavy thud that Marcus felt through his seat. He immediately accelerated again, not bothering to check if the creature was injured or incapacitated. His only thought was to put distance between himself and whatever that thing was. Glass fragments from the shattered passenger window littered the cab, crunching under his boots when he adjusted his feet on the pedals. Marcus drove like a man possessed, pushing his truck to speeds that would have horrified his safety instructors and violated every company policy. The speedometer needle hovered around 65 miles per hour on a road rated for 40, and he took curves with a recklessness born of pure terror. His hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, and his eyes burned from staring so intently at the road ahead, searching for both obstacles in his path and signs of the creature's return. Cold October air poured through the broken passenger window, bringing with it the smell of pine trees and something else. Something musky and rotten that made his stomach churn. He could hear the wind whistling through the gap, a mournful sound that reminded him of how exposed and vulnerable he was, despite being enclosed in several tons of steel and diesel machinery. The GPS showed he was about halfway through Bray Road, maybe 4 more miles, until he reached the state highway where there would be more traffic, more lights, more signs of human civilization. 4 miles had never seemed so far. Marcus found himself bargaining with whatever forces might be listening, promising that if he made it through this night, he would never take another night route through rural Wisconsin, that he would quit trucking altogether if necessary, that he would do anything to see his apartment in Green Bay again. The terror had moved beyond adrenaline now and settled into something colder and more focused, a primal survival instinct that sharpened his senses and made every shadow seem like a threat, every sound a warning. At 9:07, his headlights illuminated a structure ahead on the right side of the road. Marcus's first thought was a house, a place with people and lights and safety. But as he got closer, he realized it was an old barn, long abandoned, judging by the sagging roof and the boards that hung loose from the walls. Next to the barn was a gravel driveway that led back into what looked like an overgrown farmyard. Marcus knew that stopping was dangerous, that every minute he remained stationary increased the risk of another encounter. But his truck was damaged, glass covered the passenger seat, and his hands were shaking so badly he worried about his ability to maintain control at high speeds. He needed a moment to collect himself, to assess the damage, and to figure out what his next move should be. Against his better judgment, he began to slow down, pulling onto the gravel driveway and rolling to a stop beside the old barn. The sudden silence when he put the transmission in neutral and released the accelerator was deafening. Without the roar of the engine and the rush of wind through the broken window, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears and the ticking of cooling metal from under the hood. He left the engine running, knowing that restarting a diesel in an emergency could take precious seconds he might not have, and sat perfectly still for a moment, listening. The forest around him was completely silent. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was the silence of prey animals hiding from a predator, a complete absence of sound that was more frightening than any noise could have been. Marcus reached for his cell phone, his hands still trembling, and thumbed the screen to life. The glow seemed impossibly bright in the darkness of the cab. No signal. The icon showed no bars at all, not even the single bar that sometimes appeared in remote areas. He was completely cut off from the outside world. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and carefully brushed the glass fragments off the passenger seat, using his logbook as a makeshift dustpan to sweep them onto the floor. He needed to inspect the damage to his truck, both to understand what he was dealing with and to keep himself from panicking completely. Inaction felt more dangerous than action at this point. He grabbed a flashlight from the storage compartment behind his seat, a heavy mag light that could serve as a weapon if necessary, and took a deep breath to steady himself. Then he opened the driver's side door and stepped down from the cab, every muscle in his body tensed and ready to jump back inside at the first sign of danger. The night air was frigid, probably in the low 40s, and it carried that distinctive smell he had noticed earlier, the musky, rotten odor that made his nose wrinkle and his stomach turn. The first thing Marcus noticed when he walked around to the passenger side was that the door was completely destroyed. The metal was crumpled inward as if struck by a wrecking ball, and long gouges ran from the top of the door down to the running board. He ran his flashlight over the marks and felt his breath catch. The gouges were deep, at least a quarter inch into the steel, and they were clearly made by something with multiple claws. 4 parallel lines, perfectly spaced, cut through the paint and into the metal underneath. Marcus walked back along the length of his trailer, playing his flashlight over the aluminum sides, and counted at least 20 separate sets of claw marks. Some were shallow scratches, but others had penetrated completely through the outer skin of the trailer, creating small tears where cold air would leak in and potentially damage his temperature-sensitive cargo. What disturbed him most was the height of some of the marks. Several sets of gouges were 7 or 8 feet off the ground, which meant the creature had been reaching up while running alongside the truck or had jumped to that height while attacking. Marcus tried to imagine what kind of animal could do that, and came up empty. He thought about calling the police, but his phone had no signal, and even if it did, what would he tell them? That he had been attacked by a monster on Bray Road, that a 7-foot-tall wolf creature with glowing red eyes had tried to break into his truck? They would think he was drunk or insane or pranking them. And even if they believed him, what could they do? Send a patrol car out to look for an animal that did not officially exist? Marcus realized with a sinking feeling that he was on his own. No one was coming to help him. He had to get through this using his own wits and whatever luck he could muster. A sound from the tree line made Marcus freeze. It was subtle, just the snap of a small branch, but in the complete silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. He killed his flashlight immediately and pressed himself against the side of his trailer, his heart racing again. The darkness was absolute without the flashlight, and Marcus realized that his truck's headlights, still on and pointing down the driveway, were making him visible while blinding him to anything approaching from the sides or rear. He edged along the trailer toward the cab, moving as quietly as his boots would allow on the gravel, and climbed back into the driver's seat. He put the transmission in gear and was about to pull back onto the road when he saw something that made him pause. There were lights visible through the trees ahead, following the curve of the driveway deeper into the property. Not streetlights or headlights, but the warm glow of windows in a structure, suggesting that someone was here, that the farmhouse at the end of this driveway was occupied, despite the abandoned appearance of the barn. Marcus faced an impossible choice. Stay on Bray Road and risk another encounter with the creature that had already proven it could match his truck's speed and was strong enough to tear through steel, or drive down this unknown driveway toward lights that might mean help or might mean driving into an even worse situation. He sat there in his idling truck, the big diesel engine rumbling beneath him, and tried to think logically through the fear that clouded his mind. The lights meant people. People meant potential help, potential witnesses if the creature attacked again, potential safety in numbers. But the lights could also be a trap, could be something the creature used to lure victims off the main road. Marcus realized how paranoid that thought sounded, but after what he had experienced in the last half hour, paranoia seemed like a reasonable response. He decided to compromise. He would drive down to the house, assess the situation, and if anything seemed wrong, he would use the farmyard to turn around and get back on Bray Road as quickly as possible. The gravel driveway curved through overgrown vegetation and past several outbuildings in various states of decay, before opening into a large farmyard dominated by a two-story farmhouse that looked like it dated from the early 1900s. Warm light glowed from several windows on both floors, and Marcus could see smoke rising from a chimney, suggesting an active fireplace inside. A pickup truck from the mid-2000s was parked near the front porch, and several motion sensor lights mounted on the house's exterior flickered on as Marcus's truck entered the yard, flooding the area with harsh white light. He rolled to a stop about 30 feet from the house, close enough to make a quick run to the front door if necessary, but far enough to maneuver his truck if he needed to leave in a hurry. He left the engine running and sat watching the house for any sign of movement. After a moment, the front door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was in his 60s or early 70s, Marcus guessed, with a shock of white hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent working outdoors. He wore jeans, work boots, and a heavy flannel shirt, and he carried what Marcus recognized as a shotgun, though the barrel was pointed down at the porch and his finger was well away from the trigger. The man's eyes widened when he saw the damage to Marcus's truck, visible even in the motion sensor lights, and his expression shifted from defensive suspicion to something closer to grim understanding. He said something Marcus could not hear over the diesel engine and gestured for him to come inside. Marcus hesitated, every instinct screaming that leaving his truck was a mistake, but the alternative was getting back on Bray Road in a damaged vehicle with a broken window and no way to defend himself if the creature returned. He shut off the engine, grabbed his flashlight, and climbed down from the cab. The night air was even colder than before, or maybe Marcus was just feeling the effects of the adrenaline wearing off and leaving him shaky and chilled. He walked quickly toward the porch, his eyes scanning the dark tree line that surrounded the farmyard. The man with the shotgun backed up to let him pass and then closed the door firmly behind them, throwing 2 deadbolts and a chain lock. Inside, the farmhouse was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee. An older woman, presumably the man's wife, stood in the doorway to what looked like a living room, her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes wide with concern. The man leaned his shotgun against the wall next to the door and extended a hand to Marcus. His grip was strong, his palm calloused from years of farm work, and his voice when he spoke was steady but carried an undertone of weary resignation. The man introduced himself as Daniel Kowalski and explained that he and his wife Margaret had lived on this property for 43 years, long enough to know what walked the roads around here after dark. He did not ask Marcus what had happened. The claw marks on the truck told him everything he needed to know. Daniel gestured for Marcus to follow him into the kitchen, where Margaret immediately set about pouring coffee and pulling out a first aid kit. Marcus realized he had several small cuts on his hands and forearms from the broken glass. Nothing serious, but enough to be bleeding. As Margaret cleaned and bandaged his wounds with practiced efficiency, Daniel told him a story that Marcus would have dismissed as impossible just 2 hours earlier, but now listened to with complete belief and growing horror. Daniel explained that the creature Marcus had encountered was known locally as the Beast of Bray Road, though it went by other names as well. the Elkhorn Wolfman, the Bray Road Monster, or simply the Beast. Sightings went back decades, possibly even a century or more, if you believed the old stories passed down through local families. The first widely reported encounters happened in the early 1990s, when multiple people, mostly young drivers, reported seeing a large, wolf-like creature standing on two legs along this stretch of road. Some witnesses had been chased. Others had their vehicles damaged. A few claimed the creature had tried to break into their cars while they were stopped. The local sheriff's department investigated, but found no conclusive evidence beyond some unusual animal tracks that did not match any known species and claw marks on vehicles that were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentified damage from accidents. Daniel himself had seen the creature 3 times over the years. The first time was in 1994 when he was driving home late from a card game in Elkhorn. Something massive had run across the road in front of his truck, moving on 2 legs with a loping gait that no bear or deer could match. The second sighting came 7 years later when he found his cattle acting strangely, huddled in the corner of their pasture and refusing to come to the barn. He had walked out to investigate and seen a dark shape watching him from the tree line, too large to be a dog, too upright to be a wolf. The third time was just 2 months ago, in August of 2023, when he and Margaret heard something trying to break into their barn in the middle of the night. Daniel had grabbed his shotgun and gone out to investigate, and in the light from his flashlight, he had seen the creature clearly for the first time, 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with a face that was a horrifying mix of wolf and something almost human, and eyes that reflected his light with a red glow that he would never forget. Marcus listened to this account, while mechanically drinking the coffee Margaret had given him, his hands wrapped around the warm mug to stop their shaking. He asked the obvious question: why did people still live here if they knew about this thing? Daniel's answer was simple and sad. This was their home. They had raised their children here, buried their parents in the small cemetery behind the Methodist church in Elkhorn, and built a life from this land. You did not just abandon everything because of fear, especially when the creature only seemed to be active a few times a year, usually in the spring and fall. Most of the time, months would pass without any sign of it. The local people had learned to adapt. You did not drive Bray Road alone at night if you could avoid it. You kept your livestock locked up after dark, and you always carried a weapon when you went outside after sunset. It was like living in an area prone to tornadoes or floods. You respected the danger and took precautions, but you did not let it control your life. Margaret asked Marcus about his cargo and where he was headed. When he explained that he had a pharmaceutical shipment due in La Crosse by 6 the next morning, she exchanged a worried look with Daniel. Daniel walked to a window and peered out through the curtains at Marcus's truck parked in the farmyard. After a moment, he turned back and delivered news that Marcus did not want to hear. The damage to the truck was significant enough that driving at highway speeds might be dangerous, especially with the passenger door partially crushed and the window completely gone. More importantly, Daniel strongly advised against getting back on Bray Road tonight. He explained that the creature's attacks came in cycles. Once it started hunting someone, it would continue pursuing them until they either escaped its territory or, in cases that Daniel only hinted at, did not escape at all. If Marcus left now, the creature would be waiting for him somewhere on the remaining 3 miles of Bray Road, and in his damaged truck with no passenger side protection, the outcome would likely be much worse than the first encounter. Marcus felt trapped between impossible choices. If he stayed here until daylight, he would miss his delivery deadline, violate his contract, and potentially lose his job. The pharmaceutical company would want answers, and saying he was attacked by a monster was not going to satisfy them. But if he left now, and the creature attacked again, he might not survive to deliver anything at all. He asked Daniel about alternate routes, ways to bypass Bray Road entirely, but the news there was equally grim. The road construction that had detoured him here in the first place blocked the main routes, and the other back roads through this area would take hours longer, winding through even more isolated forest where the creature's range might extend. Daniel suggested that Marcus call his dispatcher and explain the situation, but when Marcus showed him his phone with no signal, Daniel shook his head. Cell service was notoriously poor out here, and the landline phone on the kitchen wall had not worked in over a year after a storm took down the lines, and the phone company never bothered to repair them for such a remote location. Marcus made his decision. He would wait until dawn, which according to his watch would not come for another 8.5 hours. It was the only rational choice, even if it meant professional consequences. Margaret immediately began preparing the guest room, insisting that Marcus try to get some rest. Daniel was more pragmatic. He showed Marcus where the extra shells for the shotgun were stored, demonstrated how the security system worked, and walked him through the layout of the house, pointing out exits and defensible positions with the calm efficiency of someone who had thought through worst-case scenarios many times before. The farmhouse was old but solidly built, with thick walls and heavy doors that would not yield easily to an intruder, even one with supernatural strength and razor-sharp claws. Around 10:30, the security lights in the farmyard suddenly went dark. Daniel was on his feet immediately, grabbing his shotgun and moving to the window. Marcus joined him, peering out into darkness that was now broken only by the faint light leaking from the house windows. The motion sensors should have kept the lights on as long as something was moving in their range, but the bulbs had simply gone dark, as if someone had cut the power. Daniel flipped a wall switch and cursed under his breath when nothing happened. The creature had somehow disabled the external lights, plunging the farmyard into shadows where it would have every advantage. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale but composed, and asked if they should retreat to the upstairs rooms. Daniel nodded and began directing them through the house, turning off lights as they went to make it harder for anything outside to see in. They gathered in an upstairs bedroom that overlooked the farmyard and Marcus's truck. Daniel positioned himself by the window with his shotgun, while Margaret sat on the bed with a large flashlight and what Marcus recognized as a flare gun. He found himself holding a hunting rifle that Daniel had pulled from a gun safe, though he had no idea if conventional bullets would even affect whatever was out there. The three of them sat in tense silence, listening for any sound that might indicate the creature's location. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Marcus's eyes strained to penetrate the darkness outside, looking for movement, for the telltale red glow of eyes, for any sign of the beast. His imagination populated every shadow with threats, turning innocent tree shapes into lurking monsters, until he had to blink and look away to clear his vision. At 11:16, they heard it, a scratching sound, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere on the first floor. It sounded like claws dragging across wood, and it moved along the exterior wall of the house as if something was testing the structure, looking for a weak point. Daniel whispered for everyone to stay completely quiet and still. The scratching continued, methodical and patient, working its way around the perimeter of the house. When it reached the front door, it stopped. In the silence that followed, Marcus could hear his own pulse pounding in his ears. Then came 3 heavy impacts against the door, spaced several seconds apart, as if something massive was testing the strength of the wood and locks. The deadbolts held, but Marcus could hear the frame creaking under the strain. The creature moved on, apparently deciding the front door was too sturdy to breach easily. The scratching resumed, now on the side of the house below their window. Daniel carefully eased the curtain aside and looked down, then quickly pulled back and raised his shotgun. He whispered that it was right there, directly below them, and it was looking up at the house. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. The idea that the creature knew they were here, that it was studying the house and planning how to get in, was far more terrifying than a simple animal attack. This was intelligent, deliberate, calculated. Before Marcus could process this information, there was a tremendous crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. The creature had found its way in, probably through one of the first-floor windows they had not secured well enough. Daniel moved to the bedroom door and locked it, a flimsy defense that would not hold long against something that could tear through steel. But it was all they had. The sounds from downstairs were horrifying. Furniture being overturned, dishes breaking, heavy footsteps that shook the old floorboards. The creature was searching the house room by room. Margaret gripped her flare gun with white knuckles, and Marcus raised the hunting rifle with hands that had finally stopped shaking, replaced by a cold calm that came from accepting that he might die in the next few minutes. If this was the end, he would face it fighting. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and began ascending, slow and heavy, one step at a time. Marcus could see the door handle begin to turn as the creature tested it. Then, without warning, the entire door shuddered as something massive slammed into it from the other side. The night on Bray Road left Marcus Wheeler changed in ways he could never fully explain. The authorities found him at the Kowalski farmhouse the next morning, alive but traumatized, his truck bearing evidence of an attack that defied official explanation. The pharmaceutical company never received their shipment on time. The cargo was intact, but some things matter more than deadlines. Daniel and Margaret Kowalski disappeared 3 weeks after that night, their farmhouse found empty with signs of a violent struggle. Local police attributed it to a robbery gone wrong. But those who knew the true nature of Bray Road understood what had really happened. Marcus never drove through Wisconsin again. He requested routes that kept him in states far from those dark woods and that lonely stretch of road where something ancient and terrible still hunts. Sometimes late at night when he is driving through empty country roads in other states, he checks his mirrors obsessively, looking for red eyes reflecting in his headlights. The beast of Bray Road remains unexplained, still cited occasionally by travelers who do not believe the warnings, still leaving its marks on vehicles and in the nightmares of those few who survive an encounter. And somewhere in the Wisconsin darkness, it continues to wait for the next headlights to pierce the shadows of that cursed road. The bedroom door held for exactly 47 seconds. Marcus counted each one in his head as the creature threw its weight against the wood again and again, each impact causing the hinges to loosen and the frame to crack. Daniel fired his shotgun through the door on the third impact, the blast deafening in the small room and leaving Marcus's ears ringing. There was a howl from the other side, not quite animal and not quite human, a sound that conveyed both pain and rage in equal measure. The assault on the door stopped immediately, replaced by the sound of something heavy retreating down the stairs with surprising speed. For several heartbeats, the three of them simply stood there in the gun-smoke-filled room, afraid to believe that the creature had actually left. Daniel moved cautiously to the window and looked out into the farmyard. His shoulders sagged with visible relief as he reported that he could see a dark shape disappearing into the tree line, moving fast on all fours. Whether the shotgun blast had actually injured it or simply surprised it enough to drive it off, they might never know. Margaret began to cry quietly, tears of relief streaming down her face after holding herself together through the entire ordeal. Marcus lowered the hunting rifle and realized his arms were shaking from the tension of holding it raised for so long. He set it carefully on the bed and sat down heavily, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp and alert for the past 3 hours was draining away, leaving him hollow and weak. They spent the rest of the night taking shifts, with one person always awake and watching while the others tried unsuccessfully to sleep. Marcus found himself staring at the ceiling during his rest periods, unable to close his eyes without seeing those red eyes staring back at him from the darkness behind his eyelids. His mind kept replaying the events of the evening, searching for rational explanations and finding none. Every logical part of his brain insisted that what he had experienced was impossible, that creatures like the one he had encountered did not exist outside of movies and folklore. But the claw marks on his truck were real. The broken glass in his cab was real. The splintered bedroom door and the shotgun blast hole through its center were undeniably real. At some point during the long wait for dawn, Marcus accepted that the world was stranger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and that acceptance brought a kind of peace, even as it shattered his previous understanding of reality. The first grey light of dawn began filtering through the window around 5:43 in the morning. Daniel was at the window immediately, scanning the farmyard and the surrounding forest with eyes that had not slept at all during the night. The creature was nowhere to be seen. The motion sensor lights had come back on at some point, responding to the movements of small animals or birds in the yard, suggesting that whatever had disabled them had been temporary. Marcus joined Daniel at the window and looked out at his truck sitting exactly where he had left it the night before. In the growing daylight, the damage looked even worse than he remembered. The passenger door hung at an odd angle. The aluminum skin of the trailer was shredded in multiple places, and there were deep gouges in the hood where the creature must have climbed onto the front of the cab at some point during the initial attack. Daniel suggested they wait until full sunrise before going outside, at least another 20 minutes. The creatures that hunted at night, whatever they truly were, seemed to respect the boundary of daylight, according to the old stories and Daniel's own observations over the years. Marcus used the time to wash his face in the bathroom sink, trying to make himself presentable and to wash away the dried sweat and grime from the previous night. The man who looked back at him from the mirror seemed to have aged years in a single night. There were dark circles under his eyes, new lines around his mouth from the stress, and a haunted quality to his expression that had not been there before. He thought about calling his dispatcher as soon as he got cell phone signal, thought about what he would say to explain why he had missed the delivery deadline. The truth was out of the question. He would have to fabricate some story about mechanical breakdown or illness, something mundane that would not raise questions he could not answer. By 6:15, the sun had fully risen, painting the farmyard in shades of gold and orange that seemed impossible after the horrors of the previous night. The three of them went downstairs together, Daniel leading with his shotgun despite the daylight. The first floor of the house was a disaster. The window in what had been a sitting room was completely shattered, with broken glass scattered across the floor and furniture. Deep claw marks scored the walls and the wooden floorboards, and several pieces of furniture had been overturned or smashed. A bookshelf had been pulled away from the wall, its contents strewn everywhere. In the kitchen, they found cabinet doors hanging open and dishes broken on the floor, as if the creature had been searching for something or simply venting its rage at being denied access to the upper floor. The damage would take days to repair, and Margaret stood in the doorway of her kitchen with fresh tears in her eyes, looking at the destruction of her carefully maintained home. Marcus offered to help with the cleanup, but Daniel shook his head and said the most helpful thing Marcus could do was get himself and his truck away from here before the creature returned. These attacks came in waves, according to Daniel's experience, and there was no guarantee that daylight would keep it away indefinitely. Marcus did not need to be told twice. He thanked the Kowalskis profusely for saving his life, exchanged phone numbers even though he suspected neither of them would ever call, and walked out to his truck with Daniel accompanying him, shotgun still in hand. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of birds singing and a light breeze rustling through the autumn leaves. It seemed impossible that such a beautiful morning could follow such a nightmarish night, but Marcus was learning that impossible things happened more often than anyone wanted to admit. The inspection of his truck in full daylight revealed damage that would cost thousands of dollars to repair. The passenger door would need to be completely replaced, the window obviously needed to be replaced, and multiple panels on the trailer would need to be cut out and new aluminum welded in place. Marcus took photos with his phone, now showing 2 bars of signal strength in the morning light, documenting everything for the insurance claim he would have to file. He knew the insurance company would question the claw mark patterns, would probably accuse him of filing a fraudulent claim or suggest the damage came from some kind of farming equipment accident. But that was a problem for later. Right now, His only goal was to get off Bray Road and back to civilization, where monsters did not hunt travelers and the normal rules of reality applied. He climbed into the cab, brushed away more glass fragments that had fallen onto the seat overnight, and started the engine. The big diesel roared to life immediately, a comforting sound that represented normalcy and reliability in a world that had suddenly become strange and threatening. Daniel stepped back and raised his hand in farewell, but his expression was somber. Marcus knew what the old man was thinking, because he was thinking the same thing. Would the creature let him leave? Or was it out there in the forest right now, watching and waiting for him to venture back onto the road where it could resume the hunt? There was only one way to find out. Marcus put the transmission in gear, gave Daniel a final wave, and began rolling slowly down the gravel driveway toward Bray Road. The final 3 miles of Bray Road were the longest 3 miles Marcus had ever driven. He kept his speed moderate, around 45 miles per hour, fast enough to make progress, but not so fast that he would lose control if the creature suddenly appeared. Cold morning air poured through the broken passenger window, making him wish he had accepted Margaret's offer of a heavy coat before leaving. His eyes constantly scanned the tree line on both sides of the road, looking for movement, for the dark shape of the creature preparing to launch another attack. Every shadow seemed threatening, every rustle of leaves in the breeze made his heart jump. But the forest remained quiet and still, giving no indication that anything more dangerous than deer and raccoons called it home. As he drove, Marcus tried to make sense of what he had experienced. His practical, logical mind wanted to categorize the creature, to fit it into some known framework. Could it be a bear with some kind of deformity or disease that made it behave unusually? The size was wrong, the intelligence was wrong, and no bear had eyes that glowed red. Could it be some kind of escaped exotic animal, perhaps a wolf hybrid, or a large primate that someone had illegally kept as a pet? That explanation felt slightly more plausible, but it still did not account for the creature's size, speed, or apparent targeting of vehicles specifically. The third possibility, the one that his rational mind rejected, but his terrified heart accepted, was that the creature was exactly what the local legends claimed, something that should not exist according to modern science. A cryptid that had somehow survived in the deep forests of Wisconsin by avoiding detection and hunting only occasionally. His CB radio crackled back to life around 6:47, making him jump so hard he nearly swerved into the ditch. The static cleared, and he heard multiple voices, truckers discussing weather conditions and traffic patterns on Interstate 94. The normal, mundane chatter was so welcome that Marcus felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He keyed the mic and announced his presence on the channel, identifying himself as Wheeler and reporting that he was eastbound approaching the junction of Bray Road and Highway 12. There was a pause. Then the gravelly voice of Iron Horse came back, the same driver who had warned him the previous evening. Iron Horse asked if Marcus was all right, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Marcus replied that he had encountered some trouble on Bray Road, but was now approaching the exit and would be glad to put those woods behind him. Another voice joined the conversation, a female driver who called herself Phoenix. She said she had driven through the Elkhorn area about 2 hours earlier and had noticed an unusual amount of what looked like animal tracks crossing the road near Bray Road, large tracks that she could not identify. She had not seen anything herself, but the tracks had been fresh enough that her headlights caught the disturbed dirt and gravel where something heavy had crossed from one side of the road to the other. Marcus thanked her for the information and mentioned that whatever had made those tracks was probably the same thing that had damaged his truck. There was a collective intake of breath from multiple drivers on the channel, and Iron Horse said something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Some roads have a darkness that does not show up on any map, and Bray Road was one of them, a place where the normal rules did not always apply and where things from older times still walked. The junction with Highway 12 appeared ahead, marked by a stop sign and a clear view of a wider, well-maintained road that carried actual traffic. Marcus could see a minivan heading south and a pickup truck heading north. Normal vehicles with normal people going about their normal lives, completely unaware of what existed just a few miles away in the forest. He pulled onto Highway 12 and immediately felt a sense of relief so profound it was almost physical, as if he had crossed an invisible boundary from nightmare into reality. The rising sun was fully visible now, no longer filtered through dense tree cover, and the open farmland on either side of the highway seemed impossibly bright and safe after the oppressive darkness of Bray Road. Marcus took a deep breath, his first truly relaxed breath since entering those woods the previous evening, and pointed his truck toward La Crosse. His phone rang at 7:03. The caller ID showed Sandra, his dispatcher, and Marcus answered with genuine relief at hearing a familiar voice from his normal life. Sandra was apologetic and concerned, explaining that the pharmaceutical company had been calling about the delayed shipment and wanting to know his ETA. Marcus looked at his GPS and calculated he could reach La Crosse by 11:30 if traffic cooperated, about 5.5 hours late. He told Sandra there had been mechanical issues with his truck during the night drive, and that he had been forced to pull over and wait until morning to assess the damage. It was not entirely a lie. There had been mechanical issues, just not the kind that any mechanic would be trained to repair. Sandra sighed with relief and said she would relay the updated delivery time to the client. She asked if he needed roadside assistance or a backup driver, and Marcus assured her he could complete the delivery on his own despite the damage to his truck. The rest of the drive to La Crosse was uneventful, almost surreally normal after the previous night's terror. Marcus stopped at a truck stop outside of Madison to fuel up, grab breakfast, and attempt to make his broken window more secure by taping heavy plastic over the opening. Other truckers gave his damaged rig curious looks, and one older driver approached him at the fuel pumps to ask what had happened. Marcus gave a vague answer about hitting something on a back road in the dark, and the driver nodded sympathetically, clearly assuming he meant a deer or large branch. Marcus did not correct him. What was he supposed to say? That he had been attacked by a cryptid that local legends called the Beast of Bray Road, that he had spent the night barricaded in a farmhouse while something with glowing red eyes tried to break in and hunt him. No one would believe it. He barely believed it himself in the bright light of day, with normal people walking past and the smell of diesel fuel and coffee filling the air. He reached the pharmaceutical research facility in La Crosse at 11:41, just under 6 hours late. The receiving supervisor was annoyed, but accepted his explanation of mechanical trouble with weary resignation. These things happened on long-haul deliveries. As long as the cargo was intact and had been kept at the proper temperature, the delay was inconvenient but not disastrous. Marcus watched as they unloaded his trailer, checking off each pallet and scanning barcodes, going through the mundane, bureaucratic process that seemed incredibly precious and normal after his brush with the impossible. When the last pallet was unloaded and all the paperwork was signed, Marcus climbed back into his battered cab and began the long drive back to Green Bay, carefully routing himself to avoid any roads that went through Walworth County. Marcus Wheeler submitted his insurance claim 2 days after the incident on Bray Road. He provided photos of the damage, maintenance records proving his truck had been in good condition before the trip, and a carefully worded statement claiming he had been attacked by an unknown animal while driving through a rural area. The insurance adjuster who inspected his truck was skeptical from the beginning. The man walked around the damaged vehicle multiple times, photographing the claw marks from every angle, measuring their depth and spacing, and repeatedly asking Marcus to clarify exactly what had attacked him. Marcus stuck to his story. It had been dark. He had been traveling at speed, and he had only caught glimpses of a large animal that he could not positively identify. The adjuster made notes on his tablet and said the claim would require additional review by wildlife experts and the company's fraud investigation department. 3 weeks later, the claim was denied. The insurance company's official position was that the damage pattern was inconsistent with any known wildlife attack, and suggested the truck had been deliberately vandalized, possibly as part of an insurance fraud scheme. They pointed to the unusual height of some claw marks and the depth of the gouges as evidence that no natural animal could have caused the damage. Marcus appealed the decision, providing statements from other drivers who had reported similar encounters on Bray Road over the years, but the insurance company was unmoved. Without concrete evidence of what had attacked his truck, they refused to pay. Marcus ended up covering the $9,000 repair bill out of his own pocket, effectively wiping out 2 years of savings. His company, Midwest Freight Solutions, was understanding but concerned. His safety record was no longer spotless, and they quietly reassigned him to shorter routes that kept him closer to major highways and population centers. The damage to his finances was significant, but the psychological impact was worse. Marcus found himself unable to drive at night without experiencing severe anxiety. Every shadow beside the road became a potential threat. Every pair of headlights reflecting in his mirrors made his heart race, even though he knew intellectually that the beast of Bray Road was hundreds of miles away in Wisconsin. He started making excuses to avoid night deliveries, claiming family obligations or vehicle maintenance issues. His company noticed the pattern and called him in for a meeting with their operations manager and a company psychologist. During that uncomfortable conversation, Marcus finally admitted that he had experienced a traumatic incident on the road and was struggling to cope with it. He did not provide details about what had actually happened, simply said he had been in a situation where he feared for his life and that he was working through the aftermath. The company was more supportive than Marcus had expected. They arranged for him to see a therapist who specialized in trauma, granted him 2 weeks of paid leave, and assured him his job was secure as long as he could eventually return to normal duties. The therapy sessions were difficult. Marcus wanted to talk about what had really happened, to process the terror and confusion and disbelief, but he knew the therapist would not believe the truth. So he talked around the edges of the experience, describing the fear and helplessness without explaining the cause, working through his anxiety about night driving without revealing why darkness had become so threatening. The therapist diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and prescribed medication to help with the anxiety and insomnia that had plagued him since that October night. The medication helped slightly, but it did not erase the memory of red eyes glowing in the darkness or the sound of claws scraping against steel. Marcus tried to contact Daniel and Margaret Kowalski several times in the weeks following the incident. He called the phone number they had given him, but it rang endlessly without going to voicemail, suggesting the line had been disconnected. He drove out to their farmhouse once on a Saturday afternoon in early November, taking a circuitous route that avoided Bray Road entirely. What he found disturbed him deeply. The house looked abandoned, with windows dark and curtains drawn. The motion sensor lights were not functioning, and when he knocked on the front door, there was no answer. He walked around the property and noticed that the barn door was hanging open, swinging slightly in the wind. Daniel's pickup truck was gone from where it had been parked. Marcus tried the front door and found it unlocked, which sent alarm bells ringing in his mind. No one in rural Wisconsin left their doors unlocked unless something was very wrong. He pushed the door open and called out, identifying himself and asking if anyone was home. The silence that answered him was profound and unsettling. Marcus stepped inside and immediately noticed signs of a struggle. Furniture was overturned in the living room. There were deep scratch marks on the walls, eerily similar to the ones he had seen the night of the attack. Most disturbing were the dark stains on the hardwood floor near the staircase, stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Marcus backed out of the house quickly, his heart pounding, and drove straight to the Walworth County Sheriff's Department. He filed a missing persons report, explaining that he had stayed with the Kowalskis several weeks earlier and had returned to check on them, only to find the house abandoned and signs of violence. The deputy who took his statement was polite, but seemed skeptical. particularly when Marcus could not provide much information about the Kowalskis beyond their names and address. The sheriff's department did investigate. Marcus received a call from a detective 3 days later asking for additional details about his relationship with the missing couple. The detective explained that they had found evidence of a violent altercation at the residence, but there was no sign of the Kowalskis themselves. Their truck was later found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot in Elkhorn, keys in the ignition, with no obvious signs of foul play, but also no indication of where the couple had gone. The detective asked Marcus if the Kowalskis had any enemies, or if he knew of any reason someone might want to harm them. Marcus carefully navigated the questions, providing truthful answers about the circumstances of his visit, but avoiding any mention of the creature or the attack on Bray Road. He knew how it would sound, knew that bringing up monsters and cryptids would only make him look unstable or suspicious. After a 30-minute interview, the detective thanked him for his cooperation and said they would be in touch if they had further questions. They never called back. Marcus checked the news websites for Walworth County periodically over the following weeks, looking for updates on the Kowalski case. He found a brief article in the Elkhorn Independent reporting that Daniel Kowalski, age 71, and Margaret Kowalski, age 68, were missing and that authorities were investigating. The article asked anyone with information to contact the sheriff's department. A follow-up article 2 weeks later mentioned that the investigation was ongoing, but there were no significant leads. After that, the coverage stopped. The Kowalskis simply vanished from public record, as if they had never existed. Marcus tried one more time to find information about them, hiring a private investigator to look into their disappearance, but the investigator found nothing beyond what Marcus already knew. The couple was gone, their fate unknown, and the only witness to their last known location was a truck driver with a fantastic story about a monster that no one would believe. Marcus Wheeler continued driving trucks, but he was never quite the same after that October night on Bray Road. He honored his mental commitment to avoid Wisconsin entirely, requesting routes that kept him in the southern and eastern states where the roads were familiar and the dangers were mundane. His company accommodated his preferences without asking too many questions, and over time he rebuilt his reputation as a reliable driver, though one who had very specific limitations about where he would and would not go. His colleagues noticed the change in him, the way he became tense and withdrawn whenever conversation turned to unusual experiences on the road or to local legends about creatures in remote areas. Most attributed it to middle age and the accumulated stress of decades behind the wheel. A few suspected something more specific had happened to him, but Marcus never volunteered the details and deflected direct questions with practiced ease. He joined an online forum for people who claimed to have encountered cryptids and unexplained phenomena. Using an anonymous username, Marcus shared his story in carefully written posts that provided enough detail to be believable, but avoided anything that might identify him personally. The responses were mixed. Some forum members were supportive and shared their own encounters with creatures that defied explanation. Others were skeptical, suggesting he had misidentified a known animal or had fabricated the story for attention. A few responses came from people who claimed to have their own experiences on or near Bray Road, describing encounters that matched Marcus's in disturbing detail. A large, wolf-like creature that walked upright, displayed intelligence beyond any normal animal, and seemed to target vehicles specifically. One forum member, who claimed to be a researcher of Wisconsin cryptids, sent Marcus a private message with a list of documented sightings going back to the 1800s, suggesting that whatever prowled Bray Road had been there for a very long time and would likely continue to be there long after everyone currently alive had passed away. This information provided Marcus with a strange sort of comfort, knowing that he was not alone. That others had seen what he had seen and survived to tell about it made the experience feel less isolating. He began to research the beast of Bray Road extensively, reading every account he could find, studying the patterns of sightings, and trying to understand what the creature might be. The theories ranged from the supernatural, suggesting the creature was a werewolf or shapeshifter from Native American legend, to the biological, proposing it might be an unknown species of large canid that had evolved in isolation. Some researchers believed it was connected to other cryptids reported across North America, part of a wider phenomenon of large bipedal creatures that appeared in forests from the Pacific Northwest to the Appalachian Mountains. Marcus found no definitive answers, but the search itself became a way of processing what had happened to him, of transforming terror into knowledge. In the spring of 2024, Marcus was contacted by a journalist who was writing a book about unexplained phenomena on American highways. The journalist had somehow tracked him down through the insurance claim and wanted to interview him about the Bray Road incident. Marcus initially refused, afraid of being publicly identified as someone who claimed to have seen a monster. But the journalist was persistent and professional, assuring him that his identity would be protected and that the book would treat his experience seriously rather than sensationally. After several phone conversations, Marcus agreed to a recorded interview on the condition that his real name would not be used and that identifying details would be changed. The interview lasted 3 hours and covered everything from the moment he accepted the delivery to the disappearance of the Kowalskis. For the first time since the incident, Marcus spoke openly about what he had seen and felt, describing the creature in detail and admitting his belief that it was something science had not yet explained or accepted. The journalist's book was published in October of 2024, almost exactly a year after Marcus's encounter. Marcus's story appeared in a chapter titled "The Hunters of Highway and Forest," along with accounts from other people who had experienced similar encounters with unidentified creatures on remote roads. The journalist had done his research well, corroborating Marcus's account with police reports about the damaged truck, the insurance claim documentation, and the missing persons report for the Kowalskis. Several readers contacted the publisher to say they had their own experiences on Bray Road or in the surrounding area, adding to the growing body of evidence that something unusual prowled those Wisconsin forests. The book became a modest bestseller in the paranormal and true crime genres, and Marcus received a small payment for his participation. More valuable than the money was the validation, the sense that he had not been crazy or delusional, that his experience was part of a larger pattern that others recognized and took seriously. Marcus continued to follow news from Walworth County, hoping for some resolution to the Kowalski disappearance. None came. The couple remained on the missing persons list, their case gradually going cold as newer cases demanded the sheriff's department's attention. Marcus thought about them often, particularly on nights when he was driving through remote areas and the darkness pressed in close around his truck. He wondered if they had been killed by the creature, or if something even worse had happened. He wondered if their disappearance was connected to his own encounter, if the beast had somehow blamed them for helping him escape. The guilt gnawed at him during sleepless nights, the worry that his survival had come at the cost of two innocent people who had shown him kindness when he desperately needed it. There was no way to know the truth, and that uncertainty was perhaps the cruelest part of the entire experience. By late 2025, Marcus had been driving for 25 years total, 3 of those years after the Bray Road incident. He was 45 years old and starting to think seriously about retirement, or at least transitioning to a different career that would not keep him on the road so much. The physical demands of long-haul trucking were catching up with him, and the psychological toll of constantly watching for dangers, both real and imagined, had worn him down. He had saved enough money to consider buying a small business, or perhaps teaching at a truck driving school, where he could pass on his knowledge to the next generation while keeping his feet on solid ground. But whenever he thought about leaving the road entirely, he felt a strange pull to continue, as if his experience on Bray Road had bound him to the highways in some fundamental way. He had seen something that most people would never see, had survived something that others had not, and that knowledge carried a responsibility he could not quite define or escape. Marcus still thought about that night every time he drove past a darkened tree line or navigated a lonely country road after sunset. The memory had not faded with time the way traumatic memories supposedly should. If anything, it had become sharper and more vivid, replaying in his mind with perfect clarity whenever his guard was down. He could still see those red eyes glowing in his headlights, still hear the sound of claws tearing through metal, still feel the primal terror of being hunted by something that should not exist, but mixed with the fear was something else now, something harder to define. A sense of having touched the edge of a mystery that was far larger than himself, a glimpse into a hidden world that ran parallel to the everyday reality most people inhabited. The beast of Bray Road was out there somewhere, still prowling those dark Wisconsin forests, still hunting whatever prey crossed its territory. And Marcus Wheeler, veteran trucker and reluctant witness to the impossible, carried that knowledge with him down every mile of highway he traveled, forever changed by one terrifying October night when the legends proved to be real. The full truth of what walks Bray Road may never be known. Sightings continue sporadically, reported by drivers who venture onto that lonely stretch of Wisconsin back road despite the warnings. Some see nothing more than shadows and trick of light. Others have encounters that leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about the natural world. The beast remains unproven by science, uncaptured by hunters, unexplained by experts. It exists in that liminal space between myth and reality, terror and fascination, keeping its secrets in the deep Wisconsin darkness where few dare to look. And somewhere out there, Marcus Wheeler continues to drive America's highways, avoiding one particular road, but forever marked by what he found there. A survivor of an encounter that changed his understanding of what lurks beyond the reach of our headlights in the endless American night.